Är det någon som säger ett tecken när vi ska börja klockan 3? Kan du fråga dem där när sändningen börjar? Okay, so now I have a sign that we will start, and my name is Helene Ronlund, and I wish to welcome you here to this seminar. I am currently the chair of Swedish ICOM, which is formed as an NGO in the end of last year. And today we have the whole board here, almost, or online. We also have quite a lot of guests listening to us online. And we will have a very interesting program, I hope. We will learn a lot about what Blue Shield International is. And first, I just need to give you some information also about the venue we are in. In case of emergency, we have 2 emergency exits. One is there, and the other one is the door you came from. And the meeting point, if we have to go outside, is outside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the big square. I also want to inform you that we will take photos, and if there is someone here who doesn't want to be on photo or being photographed, you should talk to Anders Andersson. Here we have your hand. So we know that. I would just like one more time to say welcome also to our online guests. And first, we will have the pleasure to listening to Mr. Peter Stone, who is president is the right word, of Blue Shield International, with a long experience from working with cultural heritage protection. Peter is also currently the UNESCO chair in Cultural Property Protection and Peace at Newcastle University. After that, we will have some words from our colleagues from Ukraine who are visiting Sweden. And we will finish with a panel. And I will present everybody later. They are also in the program. And for you who want to stay afterwards, we will have a mingle in the restaurant. So first, please, Peter Stone, welcome to Stockholm and to Blue Shield Sweden and to this audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so for anyone who is listening online, if you have questions, you can send email to info@sweden.se. Yes. Please, Peter.
Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much, everybody, for turning out to come and listen to me this afternoon. As we've already heard, I am the president of the Blue Shield, but also a UNESCO chair in Cultural Property Protection and Peace at Newcastle University in the UK. And you'll see on all of the slides that there are 2 logos at the bottom. On the far side, the UNESCO chair, and closer to me, the Blue Shield. I am instructed always to say, when I'm doing a presentation, that the UNESCO chair designation does not mean that I speak for UNESCO. The best definition of UNESCO chair is that we are, all the UNESCO chairs, are critical friends of UNESCO in their area of expertise. It has been pointed out to me on more than one occasion that I may take that to a slightly excessive degree. But I just wanted to put this up so that we all know where we're going. And what I'm going to try and do is take my glasses off so I can see. The university has funded my post since 2016 and 1.5 other posts since 2017. The 0.5 post funding was withdrawn for nothing to do with what we have been doing, but because of the university finances in June of this year. And the current 4-year cycle of the UNESCO chair finishes on the 31st of December 2027. These 2.5 posts have provided, since 2017, the secretariat for the Blue Shield. And that means that Newcastle University has, slightly bizarrely, been the main global funder of the Blue Shield since 2017. And that funding will end on the 31st of December, not 2025, that was me in a despondent point, but 2027. So we've got just nearly 2 years of that funding left. And I'll come back to that later. I'm going to very quickly cover 5 main topics, which you can see why heritage, cultural property is important and some of the history of it, the history of the Hague Convention, history of the Blue Shield, some nod towards NATO human security strategy, and some recent activity of the Blue Shield. And within that, I'm also going to give a couple of examples of what I see as good cultural property protection during armed conflict. I always start, well, I have for the last few years started with this quote, no one was prepared for a war of this magnitude, so it was improvised. And Ukrainian colleagues in the room, I think, will understand where that message is coming from, and a point I will return to. So, something that I'm sure we all know, but just so we're all on the same page, why is cultural property protection, CPP, important? And I use the language cultural property because it's the language of the primary piece of international humanitarian law, the 1954 Hague Convention on the protection of cultural property in the event of armed conflict. But the Blue Shield takes cultural property in a very broad sense, that it is both immovable and movable cultural property, it is tangible and intangible, and it is, in fact, because the distinction between cultural and natural is a Western concept, disagreed with by much of the rest of the world, does actually involve both cultural and natural heritage. So it's a big area. Why is it important? Because it provides the tangible and intangible link to the past that provides individuals and communities with a sense of place, identity, belonging, well-being, and dignity. Yes, we must always protect people before property, but the two things are indivisibly intertwined, especially as we talk about well-being and dignity. It can help, protection of cultural property, to build or maintain, in Blue Shield language, healthy, peaceful, stable, secure, sustainable communities, the bedrock of peaceful society. And that's the aspiration, that's what we're trying to do. And the image there is the Austrian National Committee of the Blue Shield helping to train the newly established Armenian National Committee of the Blue Shield in Armenia. But cultural property protection comes with a health warning. Cultural property defines who people are, but as a result, it also defines who is not part of that group, who is included, and therefore who is excluded. It can be a vehicle for understanding, mutual recognition, and peace building, but it also, and frequently has been, used as an excuse for war, a target in war, and a weapon in war or conflict. We must be aware of both sides of that cultural property issue. In 2003, on the invasion of Iraq by a coalition led by the US and the UK, neither the US nor the UK had ratified the 1954 Hague Convention. And as a result, there was almost no political or military planning for the protection of cultural property during that invasion and the successive occupation of Iraq. And the image in that slide is of the Al-Aqshiri Mosque in Samarra, which by the 2006, the Iraqi population were increasingly fed up with coalition troops still on their streets. And in 2006, an extremist group of Sunni Muslims attacked one of the most important Shia sites in Shia Islam, the Al-Aqshiri Mosque in Samarra. And you'll see the damage that they do. The part of the mosque to the right, the dome of the mosque, completely destroyed. And that was seen by most commentators of the whole Iraqi debacle as the tipping point from an Iraqi population increasingly fed up with coalition troops being in Iraq to the full-scale sectarian civil war that engulfed Iraq for the next 5 years. The response to that from Western and other politicians and military leaders was that the coalition troops had to stay in Iraq for a further 5 years, taking 5 years' worth of fatalities, of casualties, but worse, if you can get worse than that, spending 5 years losing the propaganda war. And by losing the propaganda war, the coalition allowed for the re-emergence of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and provided the oxygen for the rise and emergence of the so-called Islamic State. Now, that's not a single line between the destruction of the mosque and the emergence of those two organizations, but it is a very firm dotted line between the two. Neither of those organizations are going to be off the agenda in my lifetime. And had the coalition thought about the protection of cultural property, and I will give you a good example of that in a few moments, prior to the invasion, then some of that link may have been avoided. So there is an issue. It's not a very new concept of cultural property protection. In fact, it goes back about 2,500 years to the writing of Sun Shou in China in 6th century BC. And Sun Shou argued in his Art of War that allowing the destruction of cultural property, or worse, destroying it yourself of an enemy, was a fatal mistake, because what you were doing was providing the first reason for the next conflict. And that line of thinking went through a whole heap of individuals. I'm not going to name them all, but ended up with Francis Lieber on the far side, who wrote one of the first major national pieces of legislation, the Lieber Code, or General Order 100 for federal forces in the American Civil War, essentially outlawing destruction of cultural property by federal troops during that conflict. It wasn't the first such thing, but it's the pivot from the end of the 19th century through to the 1907 Hague Convention and then the later 1954 Hague Convention. But that 20th century context is also heavily influenced by the gentleman in the image there, Raphael Lemkin. Lemkin was a Polish Jewish lawyer who, as he was growing up, on a farm in Poland was predominantly taught by his mother. And he could not understand as a young child how an individual could be taken to court, prosecuted and convicted for the killing of an individual, where you could not take either an individual or a group to court or to prosecute them or to convict them for the attacks on a whole community and the destruction of a whole community. And Lemkin, as a lawyer in his spare time, started researching historical examples of what he eventually had to create a new word for. And Lemkin created a new word in Polish to begin with, converted into English, but in fact I think firstly done in English, because he stuck a bit of Latin and a bit of Greek together and came up with the word genocide. And Lemkin's elements and the first drafts of what turned out to be 1948 Genocide Convention had two forms of genocide: barbarism and vandalism. Barbarism, the genocide against people; vandalism, which in Lemkin's mind always preceded barbarism, vandalism against their cultural property. And it was what we would say in English, the canary in the mine. If vandalism started happening, then barbarism was very likely to follow. And the first time this was aired at an international legal conference, which interestingly Lemkin wasn't allowed to go to by the Polish government because of pressure from the National Socialist government in Germany, had to be read by a colleague of his. The first time that was aired internationally was in 1933. So sadly preempting Kristallnacht and the Holocaust as an issue there. But in 1948, a number of countries, for reasons that I haven't got time to go into today, forced the chapter on vandalism to be removed from the Genocide Convention. And Lemkin would later write that that was his biggest regret of the whole enterprise. So vandalism was taken out of the convention, but it was, another English term, the genie was out of the bottle, and the idea was out. So in the Nuremberg trials, senior Nazis were convicted both for what Lemkin would have called barbarism and vandalism. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 27 talks about a human right of access to culture and by implication cultural property. Again, that probably wouldn't have been there without Lemkin's work beforehand. And it underpins the whole of the agenda of the 54 Convention. In the Second World War, when the First World War, there had been very limited attempts at cultural property protection. And one aspect of it was, as part of the peace treaty, Germany had to replace the same number of books as they had specifically destroyed at the library in Louvain to Belgium. They couldn't provide the exact books because, of course, all of those had been burned, as had the paper inventory. But that was part of the peace treaty. In the Second World War, the so-called monuments men and women were civilian experts conscripted into the military to try to protect cultural property and track down cultural property that had been taken by the Nazi regime back to Germany and elsewhere to provide the core of a collection that was going to become the Führer Museum in Germany after the war. But after that, there was very little contact between the military and the heritage experts over the next 40 years. Very, very simplistically, the military became more right-wing and the heritage community became more left-wing, and it wasn't seen as an appropriate thing to have much debate and discussion. And there was a little limited work in former Yugoslavia. But then let's go back to 1953, and one of the first meetings called by UNESCO to begin the drafting process of what became the 1954 Convention. And the then Director General of UNESCO, Luther Evans, gentleman in the picture, opened the meeting by addressing those present. It is our objective today, gentlemen, and most of them in the room were gentlemen, to lay the foundations of what I may call the Red Cross of cultural property, and have it accepted by all states and by public opinion that property of cultural value is entitled to the respect which civilized peoples recognize as due to civilians, prisoners of war, medical personnel, and hospitals. Again, emphasizing the indivisibility between the protection of cultural property and protection of civilians, etc. And during the next few months, those who were there drafting the convention changed Evans's Red Cross for cultural property and started calling it the blue and white shield for obvious reasons, as that had been the emblem identified and suggested by a Polish professor who I will not try and pronounce his name, as the emblem of the 54 Convention. And as you read the documents of that period, I think it is implicit in them that those people drafting the convention expected that organization to be created alongside the convention. And in fact, in 1955, the ICRC legal team actually wrote an article welcoming the new organization. Unfortunately, that wasn't going to happen for another 42 years. But let me just stop and pause for a moment to go back in time again to a couple of examples of really good CPP. And the first one is something that the coalition leaders could really have learnt from in 2003 to 6 and following. So the issue is the 1917 British occupation of Jerusalem. And again, very briefly, the British were fighting the Ottoman Empire in North Africa, were pushing the Ottomans eastwards, and it was very clear to the force commander, General Allenby, that fairly soon his troops were going to be in Jerusalem. And one of the planks of his military strategy was speed. And Allenby knew that there was a population over 90% Islamic in Jerusalem at the time. And what he really didn't want to do was to be held up by a reaction from that population already being promoted by the Ottoman Empire that this was a reiteration of the Crusades by Christians against Islam. And so Allenby was very worried about the reception he was going to get when he knew that his troops were soon going to take Jerusalem. If Allenby was very worried, the politicians back in London were terrified, because if, as people were worrying, the Islamic population of Jerusalem reacted negatively to the arrival of the British military, that might spread across the whole of the Middle East. And if it spread across the whole of the Middle East, it wasn't a massive leap to think it might spread to the heart, the financial heart and hub of the British Empire, India. And the idea of a second Indian mutiny to British politicians was absolutely terrifying. The loss potentially of British India by an Islamic revolt in India during the First World War was something they just couldn't contemplate. So what the politicians in London did was write a proclamation for Allenby, which was duly announced on the day of his arrival in Jerusalem. And he also, before that proclamation was read out, to some considerable personal risk, walked into Jerusalem to prove that he came in peace. But the proclamation included and was based around this phrase: every sacred building, monument, holy spot, shrine, traditional site of the three religions will be maintained and protected. And that was a major step in pacifying the Islamic population. But then somebody on Allenby's staff, some unknown individual, turned really good CPP with that proclamation into brilliant CPP by one simple act, by deploying Islamic troops under Allenby's command from the Indian Army to protect the Islamic sites. And as the result of that, there was no reaction negatively to the British occupation of Jerusalem. Allenby was allowed to carry on and gallop across the rest of the desert and defeat the Ottomans. So if only that had been mandatory reading at West Point and Sandhurst and anywhere else, we might have at least avoided some of the failures of 2003 and following. Slightly after 2003 and following, there was a slightly more open attitude from the military to take cognizance of what some cultural heritage experts were talking about. And in 2011, NATO were deployed to carry out an air campaign against troops loyal to President Gaddafi in Libya. And the US National Committee of the Blue Shield led an initiative to identify a whole series of sites in Libya that were culturally significant and that the Blue Shield would prefer not to be damaged if at all possible. That list went into NATO in two completely different ways, and the result was that a NATO targeteer sitting on an airfield in the Netherlands identified 5 vehicles of a mobile radar and communication unit inside and immediately outside a derelict building. That targeteer, I don't know the detail of exactly what happened next, but that targeteer identified one weapon, a large bomb, to be launched from an aircraft about 2 miles away from the derelict building, and therefore very safe, to be used to destroy all 5, and by implication, destroying or at least badly damaging the derelict building. I don't know, this is the next bit, that the equivalent of a red light flashed on their computer because the coordinates for their derelict building were the same coordinates for a fortified Roman farm that was on the list given to NATO by the Blue Shield, asking it not to be damaged if at all possible. The decision went up the military food chain and landed with somebody with enough authority to say, okay, no big bomb, 5 separate precision weapons which had to be delivered far closer to the site than they would have liked to take out the 5 vehicles. And you can see, I think here, the remains of one of those 5 vehicles. All of them, the other 4 look exactly the same, a tangled wreck of metal. That got something that NATO were absolutely unused to, which was good publicity. And in fact, they got so much good publicity that they set up an internal inquiry that reported in December, I think, 2012, about what they'd done right. And from there, NATO developed a directive relating to cultural property protection. And one of the recommendations of the internal report was that NATO should develop a NATO-wide policy about CPP. So that leads me into NATO very briefly. NATO have developed what they call their human security approach, and the first public outing of this was in 2022. The framework prioritizes the safety and dignity of individuals, but recognizing that security extends beyond military concerns to include the well-being of populations affected by conflict, and has 5 elements to it. And I'm not going to read them all out. You can see them on the screen. You'll see that the 5th one is CPP. That is at the moment the only part of the only one of those 5 areas not to have a NATO-wide policy relating to it. But we are trying to work with NATO to develop that. And at the moment, there is a difficulty within NATO about the development of that. Just one other example, which emphasizes the importance of the legal situation, is in 2016, a gentleman, Mr. Al-Mahdi, was prosecuted and convicted for the targeted buildings not only being religious buildings, but that they also had a symbolic and emotional value for the residents of Timbuktu, constituting a common heritage of that community. That was the decision of the court. Mr. Al-Mahdi got, as the leader of the team that destroyed 9 mausolea and a mosque, was given a 9-year sentence and slightly bizarrely a €2.5 million fine, which I'm not sure he was capable of actually paying. But that gives a reach to actually prosecute and convict people under international law, in this case the Rome Statute, to stop them or to punish them for destroying cultural property. And there were similar things done under the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. So, very quickly, last year was the 70th anniversary of the 54 Convention. And we asked many of the high contracting parties, had they properly implemented the Convention, identified cultural property under the 3 protection options in the Convention, had they got good inventories or catalogues of their cultural property, had they prepared their cultural property and their institutions as required in the Convention, and had they implemented Article 7, the military obligations. And because we must stress that the 54 Convention is not only a cultural convention, it has specific government requirements for the armed forces in Article 7. The response to those fairly simple questions was as such, fairly depressing. I usually, standing in places like this, say that there are probably only 2 countries, now possibly 3, who have properly implemented the 54 Convention. Switzerland, because they always do. South Korea, because they have an existential threat immediately to the north of them. And sadly, but increasingly true, Lebanon, from their experience through the Lebanese civil war, through all of the fighting, and epitomized by the fighting and the recent incursions by Israel into the south of Lebanon. There are slightly better results in the richer world than the poorer world, but that's a fairly generic problem. So very quickly, the Hague Convention says you have to produce a list, you have to produce protection, You have to put in emergency plans to protect cultural property in conflict, even though you may not think there is ever going to be a conflict in your country. You have to designate competent authorities to mark protected cultural property with the relevant one of 3 different Blue Shield emblems. And your armed forces have got to abide by Article 7. Are you ready? I don't point a finger, but I would probably need artificial respiration if you said yes. The obstacles to implementation. The main responsibility lies usually with the ministries of culture, and globally they are the weakest, least funded ministry in every government. The armed forces are frequently not interested in CPP, and there is an increasingly worrying situation coming out of the United States at the moment, where the President has just decreed that the Department of Defense is going to be renamed the Department for War, and everybody in the US military who is involved in the softer side of US military activity is keeping a very low profile at the moment. And part of that is a fairly robust cultural property protection capability at the moment. And whether that will be maintained for long is something that is extraordinarily worrying. 10 minutes, okay, I will talk much quicker. Nobody wants to plan for the worst. I will let you deal there. I say new technologies may help. That's my colleague Hamady Gay, the chairperson of the Senegal National Committee of Blue Shield, walking through the remains of a significant archive in Senegal. Hamady would like new technology, a fire alarm and some fire extinguishers. That concept is very different around the world. So the Blue Shield, established by the 4 heritage NGOs for museums, monuments and sites, archives and libraries in 1996. Primary context, international humanitarian law and the 54 Convention, underpinned by wider UN and UNESCO agendas, also of the Sustainable Development Goals and things like the Sendai framework, and accepting that it is a multiple sector responsibility and opportunity. And this is the Blue Shield in 2024, but also 2025. And we envisage it as a triangle set within a circle. And the triangle, as with all good triangles, has 3 points. The heritage sector, the humanitarian sector, and what we refer to as the uniform sector, not only the armed forces, but also police, customs, border control, and other emergency services. We're an international NGO established under Dutch law, and currently we have 34 national committees. If things go right by the end of next year, we will have over 40 national committees. We have limited funding that started in 2017 from the University of Newcastle, but that, as I've said, will end in 2027. We are an independent, impartial, neutral, not-for-profit organisation. CPP must be a peacetime activity. If you leave it too late, it is dramatically less that the impact of good CPP can take. An issue is that Blue Shield internationally strives to be the cultural equivalent of the Red Cross in its impartiality, its neutrality, and its independence. And as such, we will not criticize any party to any conflict. We try to work with all parties behind the scenes to any conflict that we are involved in, because our only role is protection of cultural property, not trying to address the wider rationale of the conflict. We understand that that may be more difficult for national committees. as an example of that triangle, we signed in 2020 MOU with the ICRC, and that quote comes from the then Director General of the ICRC. We have, and those members of the Blue Shield here will know all of this, but we create a common framework for all of the national committees and Blue Shield International that we work to 6 areas of activity that we ask all national committees to plan to and report on an annual basis. They don't have to do it in this order. They don't have to do it because of their limitations for all of those, but by providing that context, it shows that all of those national committees are part of the same organisation. We ask them to address the same 8 risks and threats to cultural property. Some of the work that we do, very briefly, we work with NATO at the moment to develop exercises to put cultural property protection problems into their military exercises, with the development of policy and the use of CPP data into NATO activities. We're doing similar support in national countries across Europe, but also in far-flung places, for example, Fiji and Honduras. We run one and are participants in another annual course for UN and other peacekeeping operation teams. Less so now, but we did a lot of work supporting cultural workers and cultural property protection in Afghanistan after the second arrival of the Taliban. We're developing relations with the humanitarian and uniform sector. We've got projects going on in Ukraine, Iraq, and Syria, some of which are confidential because of the potential threat to individuals that we're working with in those countries. And we've done a huge number of presentations, etc. To emphasize this, just one quick example from Lebanon. We have been working with Lebanon, the armed forces, the Department of Culture, and the UNIFIL deployment, and critically an NGO called Biladi in Lebanon since 2013. In 2020, following the explosion in Beirut's port, that training, that building trust and partnership between those disparate organizations and agencies brought them all together to help UNIFIL, the UN peacekeeping deployment, were for the first time by the Security Council for any peacekeeping deployment allowed to move out of their area of operation to come and work in the damaged area of Beirut. And they phoned us up and said, we're coming to Beirut, we know there's a lot of damage, we know a lot of cultural property has been damaged, how can we help? So together with the Lebanese army, under the auspices of a Blue Shield architect, they protected and sorted out 2 major buildings. One in the image, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was on the verge of collapse before they were able to put a so-called temporary roof of the same weight as required to keep the building upright on. And you can see there, they've 3/4 of the roof had been destroyed. They rebuilt the roof with using the available tiles with one side of it, but the other 3 sides, the white sides, are a temporary roof. I say so-called because it wouldn't surprise me if I go back to Beirut in 20 years if that's still there. But that would never have happened had we not been working together for 7 years to build that trust and partnership. And over the last 8 months or more, that partnership has continued to work in southern Lebanon as the conflict has raged there, with Lebanese armed forces, as just one example, helping to move material from museums in the south to more secure places in north of Lebanon. We aspire to do a whole load of things more. We want to work not only with NATO, but with all of the other multinational forces, the African Union, the ASEAN states, the Gulf Cooperation Committee as well. We want to develop our peacekeeping courses to all UN peacekeeping schools around the world. We want to help more countries and much, much more. To do that, we need longer-term funding and support. To ensure our long-term future, since 2023, we have started bringing in significant amounts of external funding for projects, and we anticipate project funding of £500,000 or more over this next financial year. I'm talking to over 10 countries about potential funding of a Blue Shield central team. And I got permission last week to say to you that we've got the first one of those countries to commit to 4-year funding of £80,000 a year from the UK Department of Culture, Media and Sport. And we hope that that will encourage a number of those other countries that we are talking to support that central team of the Blue Shield. My aspiration is that we will have a central team of about 12 people ready and able and willing to work in one place, a Blue Shield central office, by 2029. That's the aspiration. We now hope other countries will follow, and I cheekily put last week perhaps Sweden into there. But there is a huge distance to go. That is not going to happen in my lifetime. My aspiration is that by our work now solidifying those foundations, that it might happen in these characters' lifetime. And these are the guys who will inherit my role and other role working there. These are the volunteers, mainly archaeology and architectural students from Beirut and other parts of Lebanon, who worked not only following the explosion at the port, but also more dangerously in trying to protect cultural property because of the fighting in southern Lebanon. I have to stop. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter. It's a tremendous honor for us to have you present here. And this is kind of a teaser of what Blue Shield International is, and also what we want to have time to discuss for the first time now in a panel is also what can we learn from international experiences, and how can this newly formed Blue Shield organization in Sweden, National Committee, be a complementary to the formal structures that we have, because this is the network is the professionals within the whole cultural heritage sector, and that is one thing that is really something that is strength. But first, we have the honor to have some words from Ukrainian colleague Olga Soshnikova from Kharkiv Historical Museum, who is here this week with us, and together with translator Dmytro Dhayatinov from War Museum in Kiev. And please, here, an applaud for them. So this will be very short, but as you are here and we are in the middle of thinking and discussing what should we do in Sweden, and we, of course, also have understood from the situation in Ukraine what a significant target cultural property heritage is, and also the whole importance for the identity that you are fighting for. So, some words. Ukraine has ratified the Hague Convention, also the second protocol in 2020. Olga, would you say that you were prepared?
Сьогодні буде дуже важливо дізнатися, що ми можемо зробити у Швеції. Ми всі усвідомлюємо, наскільки важлива ідентичність у вашій боротьбі. Україна ратифікувала Гаазьку конвенцію, враховуючи другий протокол у 2020 році. І тому питання, Ольга, до вас, що ви можете розповісти про свій досвід?
Вітаю. Дуже дякую за запрошення. Для мене дуже, я хвилююся виступати перед такою аудиторією. Хочу подякувати шведському народу за допомогу українському народу в цій нашій боротьбі. І хочу сказати, що все це можна подолати дійсно тільки об'єднанням і тільки взаємодопомогою.
Hello, thank you so much for invitation. It's a worrying moment for me to speak in front of such an audience. I want to thank to the Swedish people for helping the Ukrainian people in this very hard period for us. And your help in this struggle is invaluable for our country, and truly from this situation we can see that only by uniting our efforts we can achieve incredible things.
Тому що саме культурна спадщина будь-якого народу – це обличчя цієї нації на світовому мультикультурному світі. І якщо її не зберегти, то просто зникне сам народ.
Because the cultural heritage is a true face of the nation in the multicultural world, and if we do not preserve this heritage, it will mean that we will lose our face in this multicultural world. And
Саме про це, якщо коротко, саме і свідчить Гаазька конвенція, яка закликає всім від керівництва держави до просто виконавців зважати на рятування культурної спадщини. І саме про це зараз пан Пітер нам розповідав.
And this is the core of the Hague Convention. It calls the leaders to preserve the cultural heritage, and this is what Mr. Peterstone told us about.
Я приїхала до вас з Харкова. Харків знаходиться, українське місце, яке знаходиться зі сходного кордону з Росією. Від нас до Росії всього 40 кілометрів.
I came to you from Kharkiv. This is a Ukrainian city located very close to the eastern border of Ukraine, and only 40 kilometers separate us from Russia.
І, звичайно, ця небезпека, вона не могла нас не торкнутися, оскільки, ще раз хочу нагадати, що український народ воює з Російською Федерацією саме з 2014 року. І ця боротьба досі триває.
And of course, this danger affected us. I would like to remind that the Ukrainian people fight against the Russian Federation, the Russian aggression since 2014, and this war is underway still.
І, звичайно, вивчаючи досвід наших близьких регіонів, ми не могли не думати про війну і що вона може прийти, звичайно, до наших осель, харківських осель.
And of course, studying the experience of our neighboring regions, we definitely thought that the war can possibly come to our homes in Kharkiv.
Відповідно, у нас разом з нашою обласною адміністрацією було розроблено план дій, що і як ми будемо робити на випадок збройного конфлікту.
Therefore, together with our regional administration, we developed a plan of actions, what we should do in the case of the armed conflict.
Туди входило багато протоколів і багато дійсно корисну інформацію, виходячи як з досвіду світового, але, знаєте, готуємось, все одно у кожній країні, навіть у кожного регіону в нашій країні, свій досвід.
We had different many protocols and important and useful information prepared in advance with the usage of the international experience. But of course we understand that we can prepare, but in each case the experience would be unique.
Досвід Харківського регіону, як прифронтового регіону, свідчить про слаженість командної роботи, це керівництво, це волонтери, звичайно, це директорі музеїв, звичайно, це колективи музеїв. Я пишаюся тим, що на Харківщині музейний фонд України зберігається у 32 музеїв, і жоден директор музею з Харківщини не покинув своє робоче місце під час збройної атаки потужної 24 лютого 2022 року.
The experience of the Kharkiv region as a frontline territory show us the importance and crucial effect of the teamwork of the administration, museum directors, museum professionals, volunteers. I am proud that among 32 museums of the region, no director abandoned his workplace after the devastating armed aggression that started on the 24th of February 2022.
Хоча першим завданням для будь-якої людини під час таких дій, які відбуваються зараз в Україні, стоїть, звичайно, рятування власного життя, життя своїх рідних. Але я так думаю, що така сама пожертва директорів українських музеїв свідчить про це, що вони дуже усвідомлюють, що вибір не дуже великий. На одній чаші ват твоє власне життя, на іншій життя нації. І ти мусиш обирати.
Of course, the first primary task for many people in such conditions is survival of themselves and their families, but also we can understand that such a self-sacrifice from the museum professionals can demonstrate us that in such conditions the choice is very limited. On the one hand, there is survival of one person, on the other hand, this may be survival of a whole nation.
Нам в цьому виборі допомогло одне. Те, що ми весь час перебуваємо в прифронтовій території, у нас весь час проводились тренінги, які людям, наші співробітники навчалися оказувати першу медичну допомогу. Але цього також було замало.
In this situation, it was very helpful that being in the frontline region, we underwent training of the first medical aid, and our staff knows how to provide the first medical aid if in the case of injury or if it is needed.
So, a lot of your collections were actually evacuated, packed, and so on. But what would you say, what would you have done differently if you had started over today? And what are your main advice to Sweden right now in this field?
Дуже багато ваших колекцій було евакуйовано, спаковано, але дивлячись назад, що би ви змінили, що би ви зробили інакше, і що би ви порадили шведським колегам у такій ситуації?
Thank you. Дивлячись назад, що би ми змінили? Ми би змінили головне. Евакуація колекції, рятування, як я почала свою доповідь, обличчя нації, яка зберігає культурна спадщина, має відбутися до початку збройного конфликту, за мирних часів. І це важливий меседж.
The main thing that we would have changed is that evacuation and rescue of the museum collection, or as I said, the face of the nation, should be carried out before the armed conflict, not during it.
Мають бути розроблені відповідні плани дій, мають бути визначені предмети, які яскраво презентують націю в світовому рівні. Також і світового масштабу предмети мають бути позначені, поруч з ними мають стояти відповідні пакувальні матеріали. І, відповідно, це дасть швидко відреагувати, якщо щось станеться, щоб швидко спакувати для евакуації ці предмети.
The plans should be prepared in advance. The most significant artifacts should be marked, should be selected and marked in advance, especially the artifacts of the global significance. They should be marked. There should be a packing material standing near them, so in the case of emergency, they are packed immediately and saved.
Скласти необхідні списки, переліки цих предметів, і це буде основою для підготовки необхідних пакувальних матеріалів, транспортної тари, необхідного людського ресурсу і, відповідно, необхідних сховищ, куди це можна буде переміщувати.
It's necessary to compile the lists of such artifacts, and it will be the basis for packing, for transportation containers, for selection of human resources involved in this, and it is also necessary to foresee the storages where they will be placed.
Окрім цього, треба запастися додатковими джерелами світла. Нам доводиться працювати в Харкові, який вже 4-й рік поспіль знаходиться постійно безперервним обстрілом. Приходиться працювати навіть в тривалому часі без світла. Відповідно, ми не зможемо забезпечити умови зберігання предметів і на місці, і, відповідно, працювати далі над пакуванням для евакуації. І нам в цьому зараз якраз допомагають генератори і інші джерела світла додаткові.
It's also necessary to prepare the alternative sources of light. We are working in Kharkiv, the city which is under permanent shelling for the first year in a row. Sometimes we need to work for a long time without electricity and lighting, and in these conditions it is impossible to ensure normal conditions for packing and transportation and rescue of materials. Therefore, we would not have succeeded if we didn't have generators.
Предмети, які немає змоги евакуювати, це габаритні предмети або предмети, які важливі для локальної історії і не зовсім важливі, відображають особливості української нації, ми мусимо зберігати на місцях. І якби у нас були підземні сховища, проблема була вирішена. На жаль, через нестачу фінансування у нас поки що такого немає. Раджу будувати. Я знаю, що в Швеції є такі сховища, і це дуже добре.
Those objects that cannot be evacuated, especially large-size objects, or the ones that are important for local history, but they are not so representative for the national or global level, they are staying in their places. And in these conditions, it would be very good to have the underground storages. This is my advice, to build the storages in advance, and if we would have enough finances, we would also do this even before the war happened.
Звичайна робота з колективом, командою, проводити тренінги з тактичної медицини, щоб воно було доведено до автоматизму, щоб будь-яка людина, яка працює, могла допомогти тому, хто цього буде потребувати в збройному конфлікті.
And of course, work with the staff, training of the staff, especially tactical medicine, because in the conditions of the armed conflict, it's necessary to ensure that every team member can help to anyone who needs help being injured during the hostilities.
Наостанок я хочу розказати два приклади з життя харківських музеїв, оскільки ми методичний центр і опікуємось іншими музеями. Один вдалий, один не зовсім вдалий. І нам вдалося це зробити, рятувати спадщину, а де не вдалося.
And in the end, I would like to put two examples from the life of the Kharkiv Museum professionals. Our Kharkiv Historical Museum is a methodological center for other museums in the region. And these two examples show us how in one case it was possible to successfully rescue the collection, and in another case it was impossible.
Перший приклад, де вдалося врятувати, це Куп'янський краєзнавчий музей. Загальна кількість колекції – 15 тисяч одиниць музейного фонду. Це вдалося врятувати, але пряме втручання ворожої ракети до будівлі музею забрало життя директора музею. Така ціна нашого збереження спадщини.
The first case is when we managed to save collection. It was in Kupiansk Local History Museum. We managed to evacuate the whole collection of 15,000 artifacts. But unfortunately, the hit of the enemy ballistic missile killed the museum director on her workplace. This was a cost for saving collection.
І другий приклад – це Верхньосалтівський археологічний музей. Колекція складала 12 тисяч одиниць музейного фонду. Два прямих втручання 3 березня 2022 року, майже відразу від початку вторгнення повномасштабного, знищила цю колекцію. Нам вдалося із-під уламків врятувати всього 4,5 тисячі.
And another case was unsuccessful. It was the Archaeological Museum of Verkhnya Saltovka with a collection of 12,000 artifacts. On the 3rd of September 2022, two enemy missile hits destroyed the whole building of the museum, which collapsed. And under the rubble of the museum, we managed to preserve only 4,500 artifacts.
Я ще раз хочу подякувати вам всім за допомогу. Хочу подякувати Хелен, яка до нас приїздила в Харківський історичний музей, коли Харків весь час з сиренами і з обстрілами. І це потужна підтримка. Thank you.
And I would like to thank you once again for this help. And I would like to thank personally Helen for her help. She came to Kharkiv, to our Kharkiv Historical Museum, in the time when the siren was sounding all the time and the shelling was constantly happening in the city. Thank you.
Хочу подякувати Карлу Габсбургу, який особисто відвідав наш музей разом з всією командою і вивчав наш досвід рятування культурної спадщини.
I would like to personally thank Karl Habsburg, who personally visited our museum together with his team, and he examined how it's possible to preserve our collection and to work with our team.
І ще раз, ітог підводячи, хочу сказати, все залежить від людей, від особистого вибору і від важливості усвідомлення збереження культурної спадщини.
And in the end, I would like to say once again that everything depends on people, on the personal choices, and on the importance of understanding the necessity to preserve the cultural heritage.
Дуже дякую.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Olga. Thank you. And thank you, Dimitro. So now we have time for panel, and while you come up, we have a shortage of time a little bit, but I will introduce you while you come up here. Erik Fugeleng from the National Board of Heritage. Thank you. We have Magnus Lyning. He's commander for Central Military Region, Commandant of Stockholm. Thank you so much. And we have Jan Nordvall, Secretary General for the Swedish Homeland Association, and Peter Stone, of course. And then we have, I hope, Karin, there. Karin Svanborg-Sjövall, State Secretary from the Ministry of Culture. Please change. Okay. Okay. So, good. Thank you so much. So, thank you for coming here. And now we also have listened to you, Peter, and we have listened from the reality in Kharkiv. So, we will find time for all of you to comment on what we have heard. And you represent different parts of our structure for cultural heritage protection. And I would like to ask you, all of you, what are your reflections after listening to this? What can Sweden learn from international experiences in the situation we are right now? What would be, do you have any thoughts when you hear this, what we could learn from international experiences with cultural property protection? Karin, do you want to start?
Thank you. Well, I think, as most of you, I have a lot of thoughts, but one is, of course, that one very important lesson is understanding a potential adversary. And I think what we see in Ukraine now is very telling on how we need to prioritize. So they kidnap children because they want to rob Ukraine of their future, and they destroy cultural heritage because they want to rob Ukraine of its past. And that's, I think, says a lot about where we need to be at this moment. But then, of course, I mean, I think we've also come to understand both the need for preparedness, for coordination, for collaboration, but also just how difficult it is to get everything right before it happens. And I think if we need to discuss in terms of resilience, getting that balance right is probably quite crucial, both in trying to prepare for what you can prepare for, but also realizing the limitations of what you can know in advance.
Do you think there is, in society, a knowledge of the importance of cultural heritage, or do we have to work on that too? Why is it important with cultural property protection, the things we've heard from Peter, for example? Is there a common knowledge about this?
I think there is an increasing knowledge about it, and unfortunately, I think that's, well, Ukraine has helped in that regard, unfortunately, that it has become very, very clear that culture is a target, that historical buildings is more than just relics. It's something that people have a very living connection to, that tells you a lot about your culture and that people are proud of. And possibly that's the way that humans work, that it's only when we begin to realize that there is something of value that can be lost that we truly begin to value it. But I think it's a conversation that we need to have and that we need to be quite clear and vocal about. But I'm quite optimistic that it's also a perspective which is now really taking hold.
Erik, the National Board of Heritage, you have also been the chair of the Advisory Council, which was formed after decision by the government. So that is one important step. What are your reflections of international experiences and examples that we can learn from?
Well, I think listening to Peter Stone today really makes it clear that we have a lot that we can learn from Blue Shield International. For example, as Karin mentioned, the preparedness in peacetime, the importance of investing in a robust and resilient cultural property protection and also collection management now, today, that mobilization is possible. And I think also we can learn a lot from these different conflicts around the world. As we heard from all these unique experiences, that we think that we are prepared for a lot, but still there can be this unique threat that we need to prepare for as well.
Was there something particular, according to the role of National Board of Heritage, that you were struck by when you were listening to Peter?
I don't know if I was struck by it, but certainly reminded that the Blue Shield and the civil society really needs to be a strong complement to the government authorities and the motions that the government put in place.
So I continue with Magnus, actually. You are here from the armed forces, and we are very honored that you could come here with short notice. You are preparing, working in this military preparedness on the regional level. What is the reflections you have after listening to this? Are you prepared in the armed forces?
Hopefully, yes. Now, as the whole, first of all, thank you for having me here. Thank you, Peter, for an excellent speech and lecture here. I got a lot of food for thoughts in that one. The readiness, well, it's always a tricky question to answer that because there's some security issues around it. But I spend half of my days working with the total defense development in Sweden, working with the counties, regions, municipalities, and the private sector. And of course, are we ready now? And I think we disbanded the system for 30 years ago in most of it, so we need to rebuild it. Is this a vital part? Yes, it is. Of course it is. It's our cultural heritage we're talking about, so definitely. If I had my governor here, or any of the 6 which are in my military region, I would definitely look at them and see what is the government's will in this. How do we want to preparedness? But looking at the very bleak forecast in a strategic overview, what's happening in the world, it is now time to plan, and it is now time to plan and train the plans and start working in that direction while we have time. So looking for a very good example, not within the subject itself, but looking back, I think it's 15 or 16 years when the UN adopted the UN Resolution 1325, according to Women, Peace and Security. If you look at that model, it's already a part of the Swedish Armed Forces. And we train international students every day. And could we have a similar resolution connected to this one, and of course a tasking from the government? I think it would be quite natural and a part of any military training to bring that thought process into our planning. A long speech.
No, that's good. We come back to you. And then we have also, we have these structures of formal authorities, but we also have a lot of voluntary organizations working all around Sweden with museums, with archives, and it's also what we call the grassroots sometimes. So Jan, what are your thoughts after listening to these presentations?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for this discussion. First of all, I have to correct you at this point that we usually not describe ourselves as the homeland
Okay.
federation. We talk about ourselves as the local heritage federation.
Yes. Local heritage federation.
And we have some 20,000 approximately volunteers all throughout the country, organized in some 2,000 non-profit associations. And of course, the cultural heritage is the driving force for all those volunteers is the emotional and personal interest in the local heritage, the local identity, and so all of those things that Peter also talked about. But my reflections about this is that, well, it seems to be easy to sign the international convention during peacetime, not least for the Western countries. But suddenly, after the war and the invasion of Ukraine, it's a sense of emergency, and I think we're a bit, it's like we just awakened in a sort of new reality, new global perspective. And suddenly everybody wants to talk about this, and our volunteers we can't rely on their being educated in cultural heritage. So there's a really great need for us to communicate, to give them guidelines, to collaborate on the local and the regional level with institutions such as libraries, archives, museums, because our members, our volunteers, they really need some professional support. But they also need, I think, a confirmation that the local and regional heritage, the heritage on the local and regional level also has a significance. Because the national authority, the state deals with the heritage of national importance, but we deal with the heritage of a local and regional importance, and this is sort of crucial for the local community. And what we can see from the Ukrainian example is that, of course, if you have an invasion, the soldiers on the ground, they don't make any difference between heritage. If it's of local, regional, or national importance or significance. So you have to take sort of you have to deal with this in a broad scale. And I think that the state, the government, has to sort of have an inclusive approach to the heritage in Sweden. Not stop by making lists of heritage of a national importance.
But I think that's also in several regions there are work also together with the Swedish church, but also perhaps other communities. Erik, do you recognize this? You explained yesterday that some counties are working they have worked a lot, and perhaps others need some help. We also know from Kharkiv example that the larger museums can be like a center for supporting the more smaller voluntary museums perhaps, or libraries, or everything. What do you...
Yep, well,
how can we support this that is asked for?
Yeah, so there's no contradiction in that. In Sweden, we have 8 of the 21 county-administrative boards has undergone a task to identify and then seek the approval to mark cultural property with the blue shield, for example. And they also, to some extent, have come quite far when it comes to the planning of the protection or evacuation and so forth. But I think it's also important to recognize and value local cultural heritage and cultural property that might not end up in such lists or be such markings. Thank you, Jan, for speaking about it.
Yes, I think there's the big frustration for everybody who tries to make priorities now, but also we understand that everything perhaps cannot be protected.
No.
And Peter, do you have some suggestions on how to deal with these priorities? And is it important to have the blue shield mark?
Is this working? Yeah. I think it's important for the blue shield marking because it is the potential reach back for criminal prosecution after the event. We may not be able to stop particular damage, particular attacks, but we can, with the long arm of the law, hopefully at some point in the future, identify the culprits. And with increased satellite imagery and other elements, it's fairly easy to understand what enemy units are within strike range of a particular place. We know what the capabilities of those units are, so we know that this unit could fire something that they almost certainly have at that building it's in their distance, and they become a primary target for the damage, and then it's very easy to find the names of the officers involved in that unit, and you can actually begin to point to somebody who would have given the order to fire that weapon. But you need the legal infrastructure to actually then prosecute that person, which is where it's so important that legal element within the circle is there and robust. What countries have ratified internationally, what national legislation they have, and what level of protection is it identified under the Blue Shield system. And that's not my Blue Shield system, that's a UNESCO system of allocating the three different levels of protection. But even with the lowest level of protection, if you can identify specific deliberate targeting, which is extremely difficult to do, but it is possible, and with that correlation with what units are in the area, etc., then it is possible to go back, as we can see with Mr. Al-Mahdi in Timbuktu.
Karin, please.
Now, I was just wondering if I could just very shortly recapitulate a story that the Minister of Culture, Professor Lidestam, told me, because Sweden, not too long ago, was the chair country for the Nordic Council, and cultural heritage was one of our top priorities of that. And she had a discussion with one of her counterparts in the Baltic states, who said that they were done with their priorities. All the national museums were basically done with compiling all these lists. And of course, she was absolutely fascinated by this because it's such a difficult thing, and we're very aware of all the work that is going on. And she said, so how did you do it, and how did that turn out with all the different levels? And they said that, well, it was a success in one sense and a failure in another, because I went very proudly to the military and I said that, okay, so we have a list of 500 objects now. 500 objects of national importance that you must help us evacuate in case of emergency or war. And the military looked at her and said, well, if you get 50, you're lucky. And I think that was a bit of a wake-up call for us as well, politically, that we realized that, the military will have a lot on their plate if there's an actual emergency. So it says something about the work that needs to be done on the local level, of course, with really making hard choices and accepting the fact that this will be hard but necessary, but also pointing to the fact that the local community and the civil society will be invaluable, absolutely invaluable. Also, when we discuss evacuating very rare objects, the military will not be able to do this on their own. Everybody will be completely dependent on the local level and on civil society to help do that. And I think, again, if we go back to what builds resilience, getting national planning right is very important. Getting coordination between national structures also very important. But building trust, as you pointed out, takes time. And that will also be crucial in a conflict where you can't plan for everything. So getting all these civil society organizations together with different levels in the public sector, I think, is really key. Hard, but key.
Peter?
Just as I think it's a sort of vaguely amusing anecdote, but many of you may remember that the Cologne archive 10 years or more ago collapsed into a metro line that was being built underneath it, and literally the building just went whoosh like this. And it's tangential thinking that works, because somebody, and I think again one of these unsung heroes, but thought, who's got the capability of getting as much of this material out before it becomes too dangerous? And it was the Cologne dustbin lorries, the refuge collectors, and they transferred all of the refuge lorries there with their green wheelie bins, and they put all of the archives into these wheelie bins, and a succession of the wheelie bins took all of them away to elsewhere. nobody would have thought of that in planning, or maybe they should have thought about that in planning, but that's the sort of just tangential thing.
So you need to have some kind of fantasy in this also, and it appears perhaps in the situation also.
Yeah.
But we also know that everything cannot be evacuated, and sometimes I think also the evacuation issue is perhaps a little bit too dominating in the discussion. So what can we do to protect at site? We hear about underground storage, for example, containers you have been talking about, but it's also a question of planning for also for natural disasters. What do you think, Magnus? What are do you have any plans for how you plan your strategies in connection to cultural heritage yet in the armed forces?
No, I wouldn't say that we are tasked with it yet. And I think we're missing a very important authority here right now, is police force.
Yes, they couldn't
And
come.
if you look at it in a Swedish perspective, I mean, the police force are the only one in Sweden that are allowed to use some kind
You
of...
said police force. I thought you said civil defense agency, but police.
Police force. Because,
Yes.
I mean, they're the ones that can protect and have a violence authority during peacetime. The military don't. I mean, Sweden is a democracy. You don't use military to use force on other people. So using the Swedish military in a situation where the government has not declared a higher state of readiness is impossible. It's the police force. And I think, but then look at it in a regional perspective. We have newly started, especially in Stockholm County, a council of higher total defense council. I'm not sure the English translation of it. And there is an interconnection between all these authorities. And I am sure that if we were tasked by, in that sense of doing any planning, it would work out. But the workhorse in that sense, I would say, would still be the volunteer organizations, but with the support of the police. But would be a part of planning? Yes, we would, most likely.
Yes. So, Erik, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I would just wanted to follow up on the importance of what we call the basic preparedness work within all the institutions, and perhaps the most common advice we give from the Swedish National Authority, which is like having a sound collection management, doing a risk analysis, disaster plan, exercises and so forth, which does not include evacuating as a first-hand option, which, as you said, could only be an option for a small amount of our collections in Sweden. But also to ensure that you have a robust, for example, storage facility. So in a few weeks we will undergo a kind of a survey, national survey with all the regional museums to assess the security in those magazines that we already have today in Sweden, because we do know from previous works that there are a lot of, for example, storage magazines that in Sweden that from a preparedness perspective does not fit the role.
Evacuate cultural property is it's not something that I am so concerned about. I mean, our non-profit associations, our volunteers, they're in sparsely populated rural areas, and I mean, it's quite the opposite. That, as you pointed out, that the civil society is more of a resource. If you need help to evacuate, the churches, the inventories of the churches, for example, in the nearby villages. So I'm not so concerned about that. And as I know, I mean, all our members are non-profit associations all throughout Sweden, hembygdsföreningar. Many of them has existed for some 100 years. And they always managed in somehow to take care of their properties, to ensure that there won't be any fires, other damages. We have insurance, so I looked at the statistic earlier this day, and I saw, well, just today, this year, there was no fire, but last year there was fire, and we always try to prevent this kind of damage by taking different kind of measures. So I'm pretty confident that our members and our volunteers will sort of step up, and they'll go to the church, they go to other sites, they'll try to rescue what is possible, if it needs to be evacuated, if there's a fire, if there's any other kind of necessity. So
the preparedness is rather good, you would say.
I think because they have this deep sense of responsibility for the local community, and they also collaborate with other local associations such as the Red Cross and the Church of Sweden and different kinds of associations on the strictly local level. So I'm not so concerned about that. I think it's perhaps it's a more difficult question when you talk about the cultural heritage and cultural properties within the cities, because then I think it should be a lot more complicated task to sort of use the civil society and the volunteers.
Erik?
Yes, John mentioned it now. The need for evacuation as a preparedness measurement may vary widely depending on where in Sweden you are. But as we heard from our Ukrainian colleagues here, it is necessary to be able to evacuate. And so that Sweden not end up in a situation where we only can have 50 objects on the list. There are some measurements being taken in Sweden. So, for example, the Swedish National Heritage Board are currently working on a specific government assignment, developing preparedness plans for evacuation of objects, for example, including building mobile storage solutions, secure transports, and also its own wartime organization around that. And if we are to look at what Blue Shield Sweden can, but the role of Blue Shield Sweden really can be, you can also know that in Sweden, the National Heritage Board had also recently assigned as a preparedness authority, so giving us the mandate, formally mandate to coordinate and risk and disaster management within our field, but also collaborating with other authorities and actors within the total defense, for example. And also, as you mentioned twice now, Helene, the Council for Protection of Cultural Heritage, which has also helped the government to assess what are the needs in Sweden, and from today also working on a plan together to actually also address those needs, doing things.
Yeah. And I was thinking training and education, because if you train and educate, you are also more likely not to be panicked in a situation. This collaboration with NATO and Blue Shield, for example, is that something that have been discussed within Swedish military education? Because I think there might be quite a lot of interesting experiences from Norway, for example, you mentioned, and also to have perhaps we have a lot of specialists here in conservatory preservation, digitalization. How do we connect all these competences to actually be culture property protectioners when it's really like a special group? Because that is also what you do, Peter. Culture property protection units are formed in some countries, for example in Ukraine. Could you just say something about what is that?
So one of the obligations under Article 7 of the Hague Convention is for the armed forces to have, I think the language is specialized expertise, something like that, within their armed forces to regarding CPP. And those are supposed to be people who would then liaise directly with either their own organisations if the issue is at home, or with the organisations in a different country that they are fighting in. And that is, there's a response, there are two sort of basic responses to that. The UK, the Dutch, the Austrians, and a number of others, the Ukrainians now, have specialised small units within their armed forces that are there to fulfil that obligation.
Are they militaries,
Yeah,
or are
military.
they culture
No,
property
No,
people?
they're military, they're people in uniform.
Yeah.
It was astonishing when we were trying to set this up in the UK to look at the educational background of British Army officers, and not in the Army, but cross-service officers. And a ridiculous percentage, I can't remember, something like 20% of them had degrees in either history or archaeology.
Really?
And, you know, it was absolutely astonishing. You know, there was a ready mix of people already in place who could be sort of moved sideways within the military structure. They also, in the UK, developed a fast-track route for cultural property experts from outside the military who were willing to join the military with some fast-track training of about, I think, 2 months that they had to do, and were given a junior rank in the army, but they were part of that unit. Now, that's great, and it worked really well, and there was a lot of good publicity around the UK developing that. And it was started in, I think, 2018. By 2019, they had 19 part-time officers in that unit, fully trained, which we'd helped with the training. We developed their first training program for them. They then took much of that training inside the military, which was great. And then there were changes in the military structure, and the unit moved brigades, and because they moved brigades, the jobs that the first brigade had populated with 19 part-time reserve officers were kept in the original brigade to do something completely different, or most of them were kept. So we're now down from 19 to 6. And if you're down to 6 reserve officers, that means you'll be lucky to have 2 who are deployable at any one time. So what starts off with great intention, with fanfare, needs to be maintained and pushed through the system. Yes. The other one, very quickly, is what the Americans had started as a process, was not to have units who were specialists, but to train their, what the Americans call civil affairs officers, who are the people who are non-combatant soldiers, who liaise with the local population either during or following a conflict. And so they gave a basic understanding of CPP to all of those officers, or to a large number of those officers. Where that will go over the next 6-12 months in the US, goodness only knows.
It's interesting, and I'm looking for the word now in English, hemvärnet. I'm not sure what it is in English. We have this local...
Home guard.
Oh, home guard.
Home guard.
The home
Okay.
guard, because the home guard, of course. That could also be perhaps something... the home guard has increased in numbers now due to the Ukrainian situation. So there is also a more local level that could actually perhaps be a resource in this. What do you think, Erik?
100%. I think the experiences and learning from collaborating with both NATO and their armed forces, for example, regarding educations and exercises and so forth, would be essential and crucial for the preparedness in Sweden. I think we really should try to perhaps be one of the focus areas for Blue Shield Sweden, but also to, as we said, act as a bridge between state-led preparedness and the hundreds or thousands of private and non-profit actors that engage a large amount of the Swedish cultural heritage work. Also help us in a wide area, also just strengthen the international perspective through the experience of all of these conflicts around the world, and help us, fill knowledge gaps that are not covered by the broad mandate that we, government authority, have. And also, I think, in a crisis, Blue Shield can be a more flexible, proactive partner, and if I may say, perhaps also responding much quicker and mobilizing much faster than government authorities may be able to do.
Actually, we already did by mobilizing 2 people, sending them to a training course in the European Union from Blue Shield Board. So that was one start of being quick. But that is also something we want to come back to. And but now we will start to round up this panel, and we will have
Can I just comment
yeah,
on the
absolutely.
Home Guard?
So
yeah,
please.
Sweden has a military, it has a police force. We don't have any paramilitary systems, and the division of who gets to do what is very clear.
Yes.
So and the Home Guard is definitely a part of the armed forces.
Yes.
They are activated by the government. So therefore, so let's not do a vision here that, of course, we can train and we'll do whatever the government tells us to do, and in that sense. But there's a fine line here of democracy.
Absolutely.
And I want to raise a big cheers to the police force, because they will do the big load here.
So that is
So,
a message to
Yeah.
National Board of
Yeah,
Heritage
yeah.
and perhaps to
Yeah.
the Advisory Council and to Ministry of Culture. Good. No, of course we have, and that is something that maybe a lot of people are asking for within the cultural heritage sector now, how to coordinate, who is deciding what and what should we do. And the responsibility is very big within each institution, but then we also need to find ways to network and to have structure for command. And for example, I was just, perhaps it could be some final words from all of you, because when you start doing something, you start evacuating. You have also talked about this, Peter. It is a signal that something is going on. And we also know from, for example, Ukraine, that there was a directive from the Ministry of Culture already in 2021, early 2022, before the start of the invasion, that you should stay open, stay normal. And I heard from my colleagues here in Ukraine that maybe that was not, we could have done more if we had possibility to close and start doing things. So this is also something to think about, and if you think about that question and also want to say some final words of what you think is most important for Blue Shield now, Sweden, is it a good sign that we are becoming proactive, or is it a signal to an antagonist to see that we are stepping up? Erik, you want to start? And that will be also some final comments from you, and then we will ask Birgitta to closure.
I was just triggered by your last question. I think it's really important that Sweden signalize that we are prepared and that we raise our preparedness, because that is perhaps what keeps us out of an armed conflict, that we are prepared. Then, of course, we have to be vigilant what kind of things we communicate or not. But your other question, I think that already today we can see evidence of kind of activities going on even in Sweden. And so as you're saying, we need to be, all of us need to be, take the responsibility to be alert and actually build the preparedness to be able to handle those kind of influences, wherever they may be. It could be cyber attacks or it could be something physical. So that we can both protect the cultural heritage, but also I think it's really important that we can maintain open, as the directive was in Ukraine, because we will have a central role during a crisis or a war for people to continue our normal life, or to reflect on what's happening, or to collect and gather information for future generations to come to understand the conflict that is actually happening here and now. As well as we need to start doing those necessary preparedness now in peacetime.
Thank you. Jan, what do you...
Well, it's hard to summarize this, but I think, it's an ongoing cyber warfare at the moment, isn't it? It's a lot of disinformation, and there are subtle attacks on the society and our sense of understanding of our local heritage and the cultural heritage, and this is very difficult to deal with. I think Sweden is probably one of the world's most developed bureaucracies, and perhaps we are going to fool ourselves if we think that we can plan everything, that in terms of crisis there will be a plan. Do this, you should do that, and you should do that, and everything will go smoothly. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. In a crisis, you will see a lot of volunteers, probably a lot of volunteering people who will rush forward and behave in a way that is very hard to predict. So what can you do to prepare them? Well, you can offer good guidelines, information, you can educate people. And you can educate people and also take benefit of all those local small associations and all those volunteers that I know they're going to step up in terms of crisis, in the event of crisis. I think you're going to see that in Västernorrland at this moment, when the flooding has destroyed a lot of roads and so on. So I'm pretty confident, but you have to be so realistic from a state point of view, from the authorities, that you have to prioritize good education, good information, and guidelines that are tailored for non-educated target groups and stakeholders.
Yeah. It sounds hopeful that everybody will step up.
I
Magnus,
think
what would you like to
No,
say as a
I'd like to
comment?
quote one of our great governors in Sweden. He once stated, since we're using new vocabulary now in Sweden, since we are a member of NATO, deterrence is one of them. Is that probably the biggest deterrence towards an aggressor we can have is a resilient society. So my take on this is keep on planning. Don't stop by 50 rare artifacts. Go ahead and plan for everything. There's always some things that can be saved. The other thing I take as well, bring along, is that looking at I can't remember the article now, in the Hague Convention,
7.
27.
27.
No, Article 7.
7, yeah, thank you. Is that, yes, why not train some of the authorities in Sweden for that mission? Why not? We do it with gender operation, military operations. We do it with other things. It's just another way to look at the plan. So I see no contradiction in that, and I think the Swedish armed forces, police, and all the others are mature enough to handle it. So looking forward to that task in the near future. Thank you.
Good, thank you. That was also a hopeful comment. And Karin, would you like to?
Well, you know, this is going to sound absolutely crazy, but I think we should, in a sense, rejoice in the fact that there is a sense of urgency.
Yes.
Because
we need it.
Because we need it, because I find so much motivation in so many different rooms when these issues are being discussed, and I think that's quite heartening, actually, that there is a dedication and a motivation to really get going, even though we know that there is so much left to do. And I think that's also important to remember, that to not panic about the fact that we haven't completed the mission just yet, and to try to do things one thing at a time, but in the right series, so to speak. I think, I mean, from the government's point of view, I mean, we made a priority to name a number of central authorities, preparedness authorities within the cultural sector. We have the council that you are working on right now, Erik, to try to coordinate. We're putting in money into safe transports, where again the civil society will be a crucial part. Also building storages of different kinds, very expensive, but also something that takes time, that we need to start doing right away. But then, of course, I mean, there are a number of really big issues left at hand. In particular, I think, I mean, what you were mentioning, Erik, you know, the fact that keeping culture open for business also in a conflict is a vital one that we need to understand better, and know that the Kulturrådet, the Cultural Council, is now working with MSB also into looking into that particular thing. And I think that's, if I may end again on a positive note, I think also very good to see, because we now have the military organization and the cultural sector, I think, have been quite on quite a distance from each other traditionally. Now teaming up and beginning to understand each other's language and finding common ground. And that will, I think, take some time, but I think will be really mutually beneficial for both parts.
Thank you, Karin. Thank you. Do you want to say something more, Peter? Do you think we are on the right way?
I'm sure you're on the right way. I think there's some way to go. I agree that you should keep planning and keep planning. I talk to people in the British Army on a frequent basis, and their sort of mantra is, yes, we keep planning, we keep planning, we keep planning, but in the full knowledge that the enemy also have a plan. And surprisingly enough, the two plans don't work together. So the first thing that is going to go out of the window on day one of a conflict is our plan. But that shouldn't stop us continuing to plan. And another just sort of anecdote is the American military have a term from the recent conflict that they've been fighting of lessons learned. The British version of that is lessons identified, because they know full well that they are going to continue making the same mistakes year in, year out. They've been doing it, as put to me, for a lot longer than the Americans going to war. They know they're not going to get everything right, and they just accept it. But they keep planning, planning, planning.
And training. And now we have just some minutes left, but we've asked Birgitta Karlsson. No, Birgitta Johansen. I'm sorry. Sorry. Please forgive me. You are the chair of Cultural Heritage Without Border. We've asked Birgitta Johansen to just summarize the most important things you take from this, being in the audience, because Birgitta has worked a long time with cultural heritage protection. Please.
Okay, impossible mission. What do you say? Well, I would like to address you, Peter, first. Very interesting with the historical background, and very important, even in Sweden, because I'm the head of a regional museum, and in the 1980s, we did an extensive listing of cultural property that should be evacuated. It's half a meter of documents, pictures, descriptions, etc. You can imagine how many objects it is. And now we are told that we have 10 cubic meters that will be evacuated. So perhaps I'm not so keen on listing. I think that we will have to work in a different way. It's very important what you also say about what happens when there's a war. If you don't respect people and their heritage, then there is a catastrophe. Let's all remember that, how important it is to respect. And of course, the enemy that we are today facing is very disrespectful. So I feel, and I believe that some people in the Ukraine feel that the blue shield is a danger in itself, because it will help the enemy identify. I don't know if that's true, because there is also, all the electronic equipment that you can use today to identify this heritage. I need to use some of my papers. I listened to Olga, and one of the things I think is very important to remember that this is very personal. We are working with something that might result in a personal sacrifice, like the people that were killed doing their job in the Ukraine. So that's also something that we should all bring with us from this meeting. It's not just the military that will be at war. We will also be at war, and we are already. So that's important to remember. Another word that I thought of is improvisation. Improvisation. You said, Karin, that this gives energy when there's something going on. There is motion. And I think that planning is, of course, necessary, but we should plan to be able to improvise when the worst happens. That's the task, I feel. Anyhow. And I would also like to see, we've been discussing this in Sweden only a couple of years, but perhaps a bit less of good practice, listing, reports, etc. I would see some more practical money or, something more. And of course, the National Heritage Board is welcome to see our facilities. But in what way will that help us? I wonder. There was also generators, I noticed. Very important. We have one at my museum. We bought one for the Maidan Museum, and we bought one for ourselves also. Perhaps I'd also like to say some words about the cultural heritage without borders, Sweden. We were founded in 1995, 1 year before the Blue Shield. And we have, fortunately enough, we have 3 sister foundations in the Balkans, and they are kicking and alive. But this is our last year in Sweden. We are going to find the final decision on drawing the curtains down, pulling out the plug, going to the bottom.
But you will come to Blue Shield.
But
Sweden.
that's
Yes.
that's the point.
Yes.
That's the point. That's why we are engaged now. We have 2 members that are in both boards. And we hope, really hope, that Blue Shield, Sweden, very important that we now have a Swedish committee to carry on the good work. We don't do the same things, we are adjoining, but we are not quite dead.
No.
We're still kicking. We are working together with the Maidan Museum in the Netherlands for the moment, giving courses in how to document war crimes against cultural property in a way that it can be prosecuted in international and national courts. And so this important work is done this autumn, and then bye-bye. Okay.
Thank you, Birgitta. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank everybody here for coming here, and also everybody online, and to the panel, and especially to Peter, and also to Olga and Dimitro. Thank you all. And now we just need members. So please join Blue Shield Sweden. There is no fee so far, but we need more people to build this energy. And then we will find a way, with all these thoughts here, to find a way to work together with all the structures, because a lot of us are in the structures also. So that is a win-win for everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Almost on time, and now you are welcome to some mingle in the restaurant if you have time. Tack så jättemycket.
bort det där i första taget. För att presentera...